A prototype PS5 just went up for sale. The PS5 just got a price drop, and is it teasing something big? And the PS4 will never die. How's it going, everyone? Welcome to the weekend update here on PSReady. I spent a lot of time outside this week and it was great. Also played a ton of Diablo 4 and I of course played more Final Fantasy 16. I hope you had a great week as well, and I'd love to hear what you're playing down in the comments below. All right, let's jump into the first news story here, which is all about a prototype PlayStation 5. So I remember back before the PS5 came out and these things started leaking, and I was like, there is no way that that weird looking PC is anything close to a prototype PS5. And then some pretty reputable dev actually tweeted out a picture of their development unit of the PlayStation 5, and yeah, everyone was like, holy crap, this thing that's like flat on the bottom, sort of looks like a VCR, has a V on top of it, is the actual prototype PlayStation 5. And when you compare it to what we actually ended up getting, even if you put the console on its side, it's kind of crazy how different this prototype is from the actual thing that was released. I actually don't know how common it is for the dev model to look so different from the one that you can actually buy in stores. With the PlayStation Vita specifically, I do know that there were quite a few differences between the development unit and the model that was released. The biggest one being that the development unit was all black instead of having that silver ring around it, and I'm pretty sure it also had like USB out and HDMI out, so developers could test their games on a bigger screen and see how they would look completely blown up on like a YouTube video or something. I don't really know. I'm not a game developer. And the same goes for development Xboxes I've seen, which have shown up on eBay and other places like that. So it is kind of crazy to see this prototype PS5, this development unit, look so different from what we actually got. So this one showed up on Yahoo Auctions Japan, and it's selling for a price of around 800,000 yen, which is like 5,500 bucks. And I don't know if my internal like mental price for this thing is just inflated or something like that, but $5,500 seems cheap for an actual piece of video game history. It would be really cool to see maybe a museum or a video game preservation place buy this thing and put it on a shelf so people can actually go take a look at it, because the really sucky thing about video games is you don't really ever get to see these prototypes unless they show up on storefronts like eBay or now Yahoo Auctions Japan, which weirdly enough, you can't really access the site. Now I was trying to figure out if this thing was taken down or sold because it's no longer on the website. I'm gonna go ahead and assume it was taken down because that just seems like what would happen with something like this. I really wonder though if you could just sell one of these outside of eBay or something like that, get it out into the wild, and then really open things up for prototype consoles to be sold. I'm almost 100% positive though that if you pick this thing up, it would totally not work. Like you could plug it in, it might boot up or something like that. But as soon as you tried to connect it to the internet, Sony would probably have some sort of kill switch ready to go to make sure that this console could never be used. Because, you know, having the ability to develop PS5 games on an actual console could be pretty cool, but also you could use something like this to develop homebrew, figure out how to pirate games, or do a whole bunch of other things that I'm not even thinking of with the prototype PS5, especially if it got into the wrong hands from Sony's perspective. I'm not gonna call it the wrong hands from my perspective because I don't think it would really affect me overall. One thing in particular that's standing out about this prototype console is that it's called the Prototype 2, so I don't know if it looks any different from the Prototype 1, but a really cool thing I like about it is how many USB 3.0 ports it has. Look, I'm not throwing any shade at Sony here, but having 2 USB ports, not including the USB-C port on the front, I think we could have bumped those numbers up a little bit, maybe include a couple more on the back, because at the very least, they can be used for charging extra controllers, which is kind of like the main thing you want to do with USB ports on the PlayStation 5, since the battery life in the DualSense and DualSense Edge is absolutely horrendous. This is just straight up something I would love to get my hands on. I feel like it's something that you would just encounter at a flea market or see show up on like American Pickers or something like that. It's not something that the average consumer is probably ever going to be able to get, but I hope, just like with game budgets I was talking about last week, like when all these documents leaked that showed us The Last of Us Part 2 and Horizon Forbidden West's budget and scope of team size and everything like that, I hope stuff like this becomes more transparent as time goes on, because like I said earlier in this segment, it is actual video game history, and it's the kind of stuff that I think people would love to read about from an actual source and not go through leaks and rumors and stuff showing up on auction sites all the time like what we have to deal with now. Next up here, let's talk about this price drop for the PS5 that's sort of flying under the radar, but I think is signaling some pretty big upcoming news. So over in Spain and Portugal, the PS5 was selling for around $500 US equivalent, specifically the disc drive model, and then the disc edition was also selling for around $400 US equivalent equivalent, which is great to hear because we've heard of all these other countries that have actually had the price of their PlayStation 5s increase to around $550 or even $600 US equivalent, which in my opinion is crazy. But now in Spain and Portugal, these two countries that didn't really seem to have their price increased on the PS5, the price is actually being dropped by Sony by over $100, specifically for the disc edition of the console. So no matter what version of the PS5 you head out to the local game store there to buy, the MSRP on both versions is $399. Now, weirdly enough, that's coinciding with all of these rumors we've heard over the past week from Microsoft specifically during this FTC hearing, where they said they expect Sony to release a new version of the PlayStation 5, a slimmer version, if you will, that will cost $399. And we've also seen over the past few months tons and tons of bundles. We've seen price drops on those bundles as well. Like during Days of Play, you could get a bundle with a disc edition PS5 and a code for God of War Ragnarok for the price of the actual disc edition PS5. So you're getting one of the best games of last year, which isn't even that old at this point, completely for free with your console. And then more recently, we've seen this bundle leak that comes with 2 years of PlayStation Plus Premium on top of that disc edition PS5. And what I'm seeing here is Sony really trying to move units of PlayStation 5s that they built up over the past couple of years so that they can make way for the new PS5 Slim. Because every PS5 original version that they don't sell has to then sit on a shelf and collect dust and or be sold at a cheaper price while other people are looking at the PS5 Slim. And now they're dropping the price of the thing by over $100 in certain European territories. Like, something is really being built up to here, and I would expect that that also lends credence to this second showcase we've been hearing about. I mean, think about it, right? You have a bunch of games that haven't been announced for 2024 and beyond from third-party devs and first-party devs. You have a bunch of PC games that haven't been announced. What better to pair them with than a new version of the PlayStation 5 and also a release date for Project Q and those new gaming earbuds? It really seems like Sony wants to have a hardware lineup for the PS5 going forward, where you buy this one device, you put it in your living room, you set it up, you connect it to your TV, and then there's a bunch of Sony accessories and other pieces of hardware you can buy that sort of branch out from there, all of them with the goal of keeping you on your PlayStation 5 and most importantly, buying games on your PlayStation 5. Because at the end of the day, while Sony does make money off of hardware and accessories, they make the most money off of games, because if they're selling a first-party game, that's 100% profit. That's $70 right back in Sony's bank. And even if they're selling a third-party game on the PlayStation Store, like, I don't know, Diablo 4 or something like that, Sony gets to collect 30% of every game sold there. And on top of that, if someone ends up buying silver or whatever it's called for Diablo 4, the premium currency, Sony collects 30% revenue on that as well. So while yes, it does help to sell consoles and accessories like these earbuds and everything, or else Sony wouldn't be making them, where their real bread and butter is selling games left and right on the PlayStation Store. And they love it even more if you buy them digitally, because if you buy it at GameStop used or something like that, Sony doesn't get profit on that secondary sale. So now they really want people downloading games, and that seems to be exactly what's happening. And we have even more evidence that they're building up to something big of their own, because Sony just announced that they're skipping Gamescom this year. And Gamescom isn't necessarily the biggest show or anything like that. Obviously, these developers and publishers saved their biggest announcements for E3 in the past, and then just a couple months later, they would kind of reserve Gamescom for a few extra games that were announced. Or in Sony's case, they would use that second Gamescom showcase to announce second-party games like Until Dawn or PlayStation Move games or PSVR games, or of course PS Vita games, you know, the smaller stuff that they don't want to use time for during their E3 showcase. But still, it is notable for them to not be at Gamescom, because that basically tells us they're saving whatever announcements they would use there for a bigger showcase later in the year. And I'm really hoping that that happens around August or September, get people really excited going into the fall to own a PlayStation 5, and you could do that showcase and then announce this new hardware. So if you're in Spain or Portugal and you don't have a PlayStation 5 yet, and you're kind of like waffling back and forth saying, should I buy one now or should I wait for this slim model that's coming later this year, I think you should definitely take them up on this offer for getting it for around $400, specifically that disc edition, because having that disc drive, even if you plan on downloading a lot of your games, it's just going to give you a ton of peace of mind that you wouldn't have with the disc driveless edition, because with that version of the console, you're definitely going to have to pick up an extra SSD. And when this new version of the PS5 comes out, the detachable disc drive that goes along with it will not work with this current discless edition PS5. So if you're going to buy a PS5, I would take advantage of this $400 disc edition. Unfortunately though, if you're in Spain or Portugal, because this deal is not extended anywhere else. I'm crossing my fingers that it does though. Next up this weekend, what I really wanted to talk about is the PlayStation 4, because we're finally at the point in time where Sony seems confident in not really giving up on the PS4, but really moving on from from it and focusing on the current gen console, the PlayStation 5. We started to see this last year with games like Gotham Knights and then Dead Space Remake and almost Resident Evil 4. It was actually just announced for PS5 and Xbox Series X, and then they decided at the last second to release last gen versions of that game on those consoles. But really, that's when we started to see people shifting away from the PlayStation 4 and moving towards the PS5. But this year in the beginning half for sure, we've still seen that split audience catered to with a few games, but now it really seems like Sony is moving on, starting with Final Fantasy 16, which is really pushing the PS5 to its limits to the point where the thing is shutting down and overheating, which is not good, but it is nice to see these PS5 games that we can at least know really need that PS5 hardware. Like if that game is shutting down PlayStation 5s, I don't even know what it would do to a PlayStation 4. Regardless, I think this is a good thing, and it's kind of strange to see this generation shaping out because this is one of the only generations where backwards compatibility was such a big focus. Not only was the PlayStation 5 marketed as being able to play PlayStation 4 games, pretty much every single PlayStation 4 game you could have bought throughout its history, Sony also gave away pretty much every good PlayStation 4 game for free with a PS Plus subscription and a PlayStation 5 through the PS Plus collection. You can now get a ton of those games through PS Plus Extra, so they're really offering and pushing a lot of these last gen games, and then on top of that, they're even patching a lot of these last gen games to have really good performance, specifically on the PlayStation 5. It's like a better version of the PS4 Pro's Pro mode. But as we're seeing with the PS3 and the Vita, Sony isn't really that great about continuing backwards compatibility going into the future. A couple summers ago, they tried to shut down the stores on the PS3 and Vita and make the games unavailable to purchase, which really sucks if you don't have any of those games because, you know, there's a whole thing called game preservation, and we're getting into generations now where games are totally digital. So if they go away, like you're not able to buy them anymore, they could be just straight up gone forever. So while it might not seem like it on the surface, I think it is a really good thing that now that the PS3 emulator, RCPS3 I think it's called, is in a really good state, the developers of that are sort of moving on and working on a PlayStation 4 emulator. So the PS3 emulator had work started on it back in 2011, and it was called RCPS3 like I just mentioned, and there's a new version of this emulator that just showed up on GitHub called RCPSX. Now PSX, you could look at that and say, well, that could mean PS1, but there are so many PS1 emulators out there. My favorite one that I use on my Steam Deck all the time is DuckStation, so when you see that PSX branding, I'm pretty sure that they're just hiding the numeral 4 there. One of the main developers from the team who worked on that PS3 emulator said that they actually started working on a PS4 emulator right when the console launched, and that code has been being passed around for the past few years, and now some serious work has actually started on compiling it and then making it into an emulator that can really play PlayStation 4 games. Now, the games that come to mind when I think about emulating PlayStation 4 games are of course Bloodborne and PT. PT was the playable teaser for Silent Hills, which is a game that Hideo Kojima is working on after Metal Gear Solid 5. That of course was canceled and never saw the light of day because of the whole situation between Konami and Kojima, but still, we've had some remakes of it on Steam, we've had people remake it in Unity and stuff like that, but it doesn't really feel like that real experience you would get booting that game up on the PlayStation 4. I mean, even the image for it is kind of creepy, so being able to emulate that natively on a PC would be awesome. And then the other game that I think would be really cool to emulate, of course, is Bloodborne, because while Sony owns this IP, even though From Software made it, Sony owns it, they refuse to update it, they refuse to get the frame time figured out, they refuse to give it a pro mode that lets it run at 60 FPS, they're refusing to update the resolution of the game, they're letting it sit there and rot, and that's definitely a game I think would be awesome to play on PC. Now, unlike RCPS3, this version of the emulator is completely open on GitHub, so anyone who wants to help work on it can kind of just jump in and add whatever they think is going to make it work better. But of course, as time goes on and this thing becomes more fully fledged, I'd expect to see a lot of the devs from RCPS3 sort of move over and start working on RCPS4 or PSX as it's being called now. But yeah, just from a game preservation standpoint and a performance standpoint, I think it's going to be good for the long term if these games become playable on PC. And of course, they're going to have to figure out how to be able to patch these games, because so many of the games in last generation are where we started to see discs being shipped with like half the game on them and then having to re-download the entire thing to your console later. So I'm just really curious how all of this is going to shake out. The real silver lining here though is that with the advent of Sony releasing their first party games and second party games on PC over the past few years, we don't really need to rely on emulators so much, because even though you're buying them digitally on Steam and Steam has its own version of DRM, Steam has a really good offline mode. And also it's been said multiple times that if for some reason Valve just went out of business, every game that you own on Steam would have its DRM removed. We've also seen apps like GOG where you can link your Steam library, and if the developer of a specific game says, yeah, this is okay, GOG will actually give you a DRM-free version of the game. Anyway, guys, that's all I've got for you in today's video. Let me know what you think down in the comments below. Remember to subscribe, set your notifications to all if you haven't already. Hope you're having a great weekend, and as always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. I'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching, and shape on.